No.
Takalos Boker Or, Daf Yomi Masechet Sanhedrin Daf Gimel Amud Aleph 53a1 says the Gemara. Bishlam Rabbi Yonatan. This is good according to Rabbi Yonatan. Kedekamefaresh Rabbi Ta'ama. Just like Rabbi Yonatan, he says Rabbi is explaining the reasoning of the Rabbi Yonatan that we're talking about Amita Shen Bar Roshem, which means Chenek. But according to Rabbi Yoshia, that he says that we're going to do it bechenek because right, this is the lightest of the punishments. This is the least. He says, how do you know the bichlal there's such a thing as chenek? Ema saif. Maybe I'm going to tell you it's saif. So Amar Rava comes and he answers. Arba mitol gemara gamirelu. Meaning like this: if you're going to tell me what would be if I didn't know that chenek existed, what would I tell you? I would tell you the norm death was going to be what? Is going to be the sword. Why? Because that's also what the Malchut does. Sikila, right, is going to be written in the Torah, right? Sakoli, many times. Serefa is actually even written in the Torah. Saif is also written in the Torah. How do I know about chenek? So he comes and he says it's a Gemara Gemilele, which means that we know that there's chenek. And therefore, once we know that there's going to be chenek, that's why he comes and he says it. So he says, my lo mipnei shikala. So he says, so then what is the kavanah then of Rabbi Yonatan when he tells Rabbi Yoshia? Not because it's kala. So he says, kamipalge beplukta du Shimon Rabbanan. Again, this is a machlok between Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan. Remember that according to Rabbi Shimon Rabbanan, they're arguing on the two of them, whether it's going to be sikila serefa or also on chenek and hereg, which one is more strict and which one's less strict. So that is the same machlok that we're talking about over here. Rabbi Yoshia, he holds like chachamim, that chenek is the lightest, right, of all the Arba Mito Betin, and therefore it's for him, he's just saying that you can't be Machmir, you have to give him like the least punishment. And according to Rabbi Yonatan, he also like Rabbi Shimon, that Chenek is actually Be'emet higher than Hereg, okay, and therefore he comes and he says, Mot Yumat Stam is always going to be, right, according to him, he says, is always going to be Chenek, even though there's something lighter. Okay, so if you remember, there were two different shitot. Do we say that a person gets chenek because stam mita b'Torah means chenek, or do we say that it's chenek because it's the lightest of all the four right punishments? That was a machloket between Rabbi Yoshia and right Rabbi Yonatan, and therefore this is how it manifested the machloket. Amar Rabbi Zera le'Abaye, says Rabbi Zera to Abaye, Shara niskalim. What about all the other people that get sekilah? They look at sekilah, that it's not actually written sekilah. The gamre. Right? The rabbi is learning from Gzera Shava, from Ovi Deoni. What does that mean? B'mai gamre. How do they learn it then? So you say, B'mot yumatu gamre, or B'dmeem bam gamre. Do they learn it from the words mot yumatu, that they have to surely die? Or do they learn it from the words, D'mehem bam, that the blood is going to be from them? Which means that if it's written Mefuras Sekilah, so Mefuras Sekilah. But not everything is written Sekilah. There are other things, right, that also are going to be sekila, even though it's not actually written, right? Mifurash sekila. So he comes and he says, right? He wants to say whether it's avodah zarah, znut of na'ara me'orasa, chilul shabbat, masev. There, it's actually, but he says, but sometimes it's not always. So how do you know that you're always going to do it? So he comes and he says like this. He says they actually learn from the pasuk, right? Ve'isho isha kiyeh evaim ovu yideoni mot yumatu ba'even yirgemu otam demem bam. So do they learn it from the mot yumatu of that pasuk, or do they learn it from, right, because it says ba'even yirgemu otam, which means sekila obviously, or do they learn it from demem bam? That's the question. So Elmaleh, he comes and he answers him. There's a Abaye answering. B'demehem, right? We're talking about demehem bam gamre. They're learning it from Gzera Sheva, Demehem Bam. Their blood is going to be in them. Di'i b'mot yumatu gamrem, Demehem lamali. So he says, but if you're already going to learn it from Gzera Sheva mot yumatu, so what do I do with the words then, Demehem? What do I learn with Demehem Bam in? Why do I need it? So he says, Elamai, but rather, Demehem gamri, so mot yumatu lamali. Flip it. One more time. It's written in the Torah, mot yumatu. They're going to die. It's written in the Torah, Demehem Bam. Their blood is on them. So technically speaking, says the Gemara, 1 second, you have to learn a Gzera Shava to all the other people that get Sekila from Oveni Deoni, because it's written Demem Bam. So whenever it's written Demem Bam, so therefore you know it's Sekila. Says the Gemara, how do I know that it's Demem Bam? Says no, because if not, then it's extra, because you already have Mot Yumatu. So says the Gemara, but now that you said that, say the opposite. If you tell me that you learned from Demem Bam, so why do you need Mot Yumatu? So says the Gemara, answers the Gemara, Kedetanya, but this is what we learned. We learned in a Braita. Mot yumat makeh rotzeachu. Remember that when a person comes and he's going to be a murderer, he's a rotzeach. So it says mot yumat. En li ela b'mita ktuva bo. That's only in Saif, which is headache, because that's what's written by him. What happens if you cannot do Saif? How do you know that you could kill him in any other fashion? Right? So, for example, let's say after he went and he killed, he was already judged, right? And here the footnote brings down Rashi, but Metzia, he ran away and he's on a boat. Now, Betin cannot kill him by the sword, but maybe what they could do is they could sink the ship. Can they sink the ship? So Talmud Lomar, Mot Yumata Makeh Mikol Makom. Sink the ship.
There's other people on the ship.
No, obviously not. Right? But what does that mean? We learn from here that if a person cannot get the mitah which is fitting for them, again, Rashi gave one example, right? It could be many examples, whatever it is, right? He went on a spaceship. Now they have I don't know what all these something. They're in but he's by himself. Again, you're getting into technical. What happens with the other people? So then let's pretend he's on the ship, yeah, and he's with other people. So I cannot come but you know what? I could have a sniper. I'm gonna get a helicopter out there with a sniper. Boom, bullet to the head. It's not safe. It's not safe. Says the Gemara, Mot Yumat teaches you mikomakom in any scenario. Meaning you're right. Obviously, lechatchila, give him the death penalty that he deserves. But let's say he ran away. You can't. That's what you learn from the words Mot Yumat. So from the words of Mot Yumat, it's not extra. It's teaching you that no matter what, he has to die. So not because, I don't know what, he got installed in his neck. Let's say in the future they're going to be able to do it. Something made out of the brick of Moshe Rabbeinu, that no matter what, you're going to come and you're going to try Saif 100 times, it's going to break the sword. You can't do whatever, and stam. Again, there's a million and one things. You could use your imagination to be mamtsi. But what the concept is, Mot Yumat comes to teach you, mikom makom. So, Amale Ravacha midiftil Ravina, says Ravacha midiftil Ravina, ve'i b'mot Yumatu gamre, so Maika Kasheled. So one second, if you're going to learn this to do with the ownership of the Avirot, so then what's the question then? So Ilam, if you're going to tell me now Eshet Ish Kakashele, he had this question to do with Eshet Ish, right? So he says, right, one second. It says, we know that it's going to be with Chenek. So therefore, what are we talking about then? Lemeitiv will migmar to bring it and to say, Mot Yumat Me'over Idoni. So what, you want to make her also in Sekila? Midaman Rachmanaru Sabeskila, Mikal Denusuala Beskila. I've got a general rule. One second. The Torah comes and takes out Nara Me'orasa. And what does it say? She has a special din. And what's a special din? Sekila. So if I know that there's a special din by Nara Me'orasa that it's Sekila mashma, that a regular Eshet Ish is not Sekila. So therefore, I'm not going to come and say, you know what, since it says Mot Yumat by Eshet Ish, it means Sekila. I'm not going to say that. Ve'ela, but rather. So one second, maybe there's another one. There was a question to do with Makeh. Why? We know that it's going to be with Chenek. But why don't we learn it from Ovidoni, right? And to say that it's going to be with Sekila. So it means if somebody comes and he hits their parents, right, they should get Sekila. So says the Gemara, Ad de Gamre me Ovidoni, Ligmuru Meshetish. Before you're going to come and learn it from Ovidoni, why don't you learn it from Eshetish? Because you cannot come and be more Mahmid, you have to be more Mekel. Which means when you're going to come and have a Gzira Shava, right? And you have a choice. So I'm going to make a Gzira Shava for a Mitah Kala, and I have a Mitah Chamura. I'm not allowed to go for the Mitah Chamura. Meaning I cannot go for the more stringent when I have a more lenient case. So if I've got two words, and these two words, and I'm going to now say, I'm going to make a Gzira Shava. And I'm making a Gzira Shava, I've got a choice. I could either do it to Sekilar, or I could do it to Chenek. So therefore, when I have Makeh Vivimo, if I can make that Gizera Shava to Chenek, I'm not allowed to do it to Sekila. Because according to everybody, Sekila is more Chamur than Chenek. Whether it's going to be the Machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbanan, according to everybody, Sekila is a higher level than Chenek. So if it's going to be like that, and I've got a choice, right? I've got Mot Yumat by Eshet Ish. I've got Mot Yumat by Makeh Vivimo. And I got Mot Yumat by Ovi Deoni. Ovi Deoni, it's Sekila. Right? By Eshet Ish, I know it's Chenek from the deriving of the fact that Sekila was only mentioned by Nara Me'orasa and not by a regular woman. So now I have Makeh Vivimo hitting the parents. Which one do I decide? If you have a Gzera Shava, you have to choose the lighter one. So you're also automatically going to be Chenek. So says the Gemara, Elmaleh, Shara Niskalin Gufayu Kakashale. He says, no, it wasn't a question from Makeh Vivimo. It was a question from the other Sekilas. He says, why? Di b'mot yumat gamri, right? Because be'emet, if it's going to be from they learn it from mot yumat, so ad gamri vodidin, so libmu meshatish, meaning like this. You have to say that it's from dmehem bam. Meaning, if I'm going to ask you, how do you know sikila? By the other sikilas, not the ones which are written mefurash in the Torah, but the ones which are written mefurash in the Torah, you already know it's mefurash. But the ones which are not written mefurash, how do you know that it's sikila? So if you would have learned it from mot yumat, so then I would have applied the exact same order of ideas that I just did right now. And therefore, what happens is that just like by makavi vimo, I've got a gzera shava mot yumat, and I could apply it either to sikila or to chenek. And what did we say? We're going to apply it to chenek. Why are we applying it to chenek? Because it has to be so much lighter. So therefore, if it's going to be lighter, that's the one that you have to do it to. So therefore, according to that, you would have done the exact same thing by all the other sikila cases. That all the other sikila cases, it says usually motu matu mehem bam. It also says both. So if you're learning from motu matu, I would have said right away that what? That you only could give them chenek. Kamash Malan comes to teach you that you're learning it from the Membam, and once you're learning it from the Membam, now you could come and you could give them Sekila. Mishnah comes and it says, Eluhen Haniskalin. So these are the ones that get Sekila. Okay, so we're going to start. Yeah, now some of them are written in the Torah. In other words, other of them, they're going to learn it from Gzera Shava. That's Rashi. Look at Rashi. Dichtiv u'sekila ktiv bei, u'delo ktiv bei u'sekila ktiv u'demem bam u'gmire me'ovi ideoni. So now we just understood what we're going to learn now. Meaning we just learned the learning of how do we know. Meaning some of them one by one, right? It's your job to open up and check one by one. Whichever one is written sekila, it's written sekila. The ones which are not written sekila, they're learning in the Gzera Shava from the Membam. And that we just learned what we just learned right now. So says the Mishnah, Eluhen Haniskalin, Habalaem. Somebody has a relationship with his mother, right? Aleshet Av, on the stepmother, okay? Ve'ala Kala, daughter-in-law. Ala Zachur, males, right? Ala Be'ema, on animals. Ve'isha meviya et Be'ema, right? And a woman she's going to bring a Behema. V'amgadef, right? The blasphemous, the one that does blasphemy, right? Ve'oved avodat kochavim, right? The one that's going to serve avodah zarah. Hanotem mizelo lemolech, the one that's going to give his children to the molech. Ubal ovi ideoni, right? The bal ovi ideoni. Again, these sorcerers that they're bringing up, whether it's neshamo, whether all these things. Hamchalelet Shabbat, somebody that creates a Shabbat. Umkalelet aviv imo, somebody that curses his father and his mother. Habal nara morasa, somebody that's going to be having relations with nara morasa. V'amesit, right? Somebody that's going to make, right? The mesit, the mediach, by the way, is the entire city. That's why it's called Id HaNidachat. Id HaNidachat from Madiach. Madiach is the same as a mesit. Mesit is somebody that convinces other people to do Avodah Zarah, but the mesit is to an individual. The Mediach is to the plural, is to the city, the entire city. That's why it's called Mesitu Mediach. The one that convinces other people to do Avodah Zarah, but the mesit is convincing an individual, and the Mediach, or a few individuals, and the Mediach is an entire city. V'amchashef, a sorcerer, uben sorer umoreh. Right? So there you go. So basically here, this is the entire list of people that they get. Sikila. Okay? Until here clear? Very good. No. Some of them are written in the Torah. So right, some of them were written in the Torah, and some you learn from Ovi Ideoni. So again, Ovi Ideoni was written in the Torah, but it says Ba'even yirgemu otam demem bam. But since it says Mot Yumatu Ba'even yirgemu otam demem bam, so they learn a Gzera Shava from Ovi Ideoni that it says the Membam, that anytime that it says the Membam, it's also Sekila. Some of them are written Mifurash. So by Bichalel Shabbat, it's written Mifurash. By some of them, it is written Mifurash. But again, not everyone. So you would have to look up one by one and see, this is written Mifurash, not written Mifurash, and then you're learning from Gzera Shava. Okay? Fine. Next. Haba alaem chayav alea mishum em. Umishum eshet ha'av. Do you know if somebody has relations with his mother, he actually does two averot. Why is it two averot? Because technically he's having relations with his mother, and it's also his ki'ilu stepmother. It's not that it's his stepmother, but it's his father's wife. So therefore, it's two averot in one shot. Okay, because it's two averot, right? In what's it called? In one go. V'gam yeshetav, right? Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says, eno chayav ela mishum em bilvad. So he's only going to be chayav because of the em, right? What does that mean, right? So he comes and he says, right, like this: Habal eshet av chayav mishum eshet av mishum eshet ish. So if somebody is going to be chayav, right, he's going to have relations with eshet av. He's going to be chayav mishum eshet av and mishum eshet ish. So two things also now. If a person has relations with his stepmother, so it's two avirot. It's a stepmother and she's a married woman. Correct? It's two things, right? Umishum eshet ish. So he says, ben chayaviv ben la'achan mitat aviv, whether the father's alive or after his death. Okay, so obviously after his death is only eshet aviv. It's not eshet ish anymore because he died. Right? So says the Mishnah, Habal eshet. So again, ben b'chayaviv ben la'achar mitat aviv. Ben min nesuin ben nesuin, doesn't matter whether it's nesuin or nesuin. Habal kalato. Somebody has a relationship with his daughter-in-law. Chayav mishum kalato mishum eshet ish. Ben b'chayaviv ben la'achar mitat beno. Again, even after the death of the son. So again, obviously here we're talking about that it's kalato, not eshet, right? Because the isur of kalato is even after. Yes, daughter-in-law is also forever. Ben min nesuin ben nesuin, doesn't matter whether it's nesuin or nesuin. Meaning even if they didn't want. So says the Gemara, Tanya, we learned to the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda says, if the mother was not fitting for the father, chayav ela mishuma em bilvad. So then he's not going to be only because of the mother, but not because eshet av. Meaning eshet av, the father's wife, is only if bemet he's fitting for the father. If he wasn't fitting for the father, so therefore it's not considered eshet av. Okay? My eneru yalo. What does it mean that she's not fitting for him? If you're going to tell me it's chayve kritud v'chayve mito betin, miklal de rabbanan savri, do the rabbis hold afagav deneru yalo? Halele kiddushin gavad. There's no kiddushin. Ela, but rather it has to be chayve lavin. It's a lav. It's a negative commandment. Rabbi Yehuda sabalak Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Akiva that he says en kiddushin tofsim chayve lavin. That there's no kiddushin in chayve lavin. You remember that we spoke about chayve lavin. So, for example, if a kohen gadol is going to get married to an almanah or things like that, that's all. It's a lav. It's a negative commandment, or a kohen to all these things. So again, when a kohen is going to get married to a grusha, so in all these things, it's a negative commandment. So therefore, there is a shita of Rabbi Akiva that there's no kiddushin at all. According to us, there is kiddushin, but it's a chayve lavin, so it's not mamzerim, right? But here, right, there's kiddushin. Mativ Rav Oshia asks, isur mitzvah v'isur kedusha cholzot mityabmot velo mityabmot. What does that mean? When you have yevamot that they're prohibited on the yevams, whether it's going to be an isur mitzvah or an isur kedusha, so they do chalitza, but they do not do the yibum. Okay? Nun gimel amud bet, 53b. Right? Isur mitzvah, when we're talking about isur mitzvah, shniyot midivret sofrim. So they're going to be arayot, which is shniyot from divret sofrim. V'mai kalu isur mitzvah. So why is it called isur mitzvah? Shemitzvah lishmoa divrei chachamim. But it's a mitzvah to listen to the words of the chachamim. That's why it's called isur mitzvah. Isur kedusha is almana lekohen gadol. Ugrusha v'chalutza lekohen idiot. We're talking about an isur kedusha is talking about an almana for a kohen gadol, or grusha v'chalutza lekohen idiot. V'amai kari lehu. So why is he going to call it isur kedusha? Tichtib, it says in pasuk kedoshim yu leelohehem, which means that there's going to be an isur of, right, the kedoshim yu, that they it's isur kedusha. So isur mitzvah, right, is going to be what? Because you're not allowed shniot, which means like the secondary arayot. Isur kedusha is almanat to the kohen gadol and grusha v'chalutza lekohen idiot. That's what we just mentioned before, which is a negative commandment, but it's called the isur kedusha because of kedusha that they have, that they're not allowed to get married to them. The Tanya Allah, so we learned on this. Rabbi Yehuda machlif, right? Rabbi Yehuda comes and he says the opposite. That isur mitzvah is almanat to a kohen gadol and grusha v'chalutza to a kohen idiot, and the isur kedusha is shniot larayot. Chaluf Ehud machlif. Hachalitza baya. He says, well, you still need chalitza. Now, Visa, because you're going to tell me now, Rabbi Yehuda holds like Rabbi Akiva. So he says, Michte, chayve lavin Rabbi Akiva, chayve kritut. They're exactly the same. Meaning, according to Shitat Rabbi Akiva, chayve lavin and chayve kritut, selam mishos. The bidiyuk oto dovar. So chayve kritut, lavene chalitza v'yibum. You don't do chalitza. There's no chalitza nibum by chayve kritut. There's nothing there. So answers the Gemara, you're right. Lidvarav the Tanakama kamar. Right, this is to the Shitav Tanakama, velei lo sfirle. He doesn't actually hold of it. Okay, fine. Kiata Rav Yitzchak. When Rav Yitzchak came, Tani Kilitznan, he taught the machloket as follows. Rabbi Yehuda says, Eno chayav el mishum ha'em bilvad. Meaning, right, when we're talking about in our Mishnah, it's only going to be because of the mother. Which means if the kiddushin of the father is tofes in the mother, the ben is only going to be over on going with the mother, and not like the Braita, right, that we just mentioned. Okay, so he says, "V'tamamai." Why? Amar Abaye says, "Damakar." The pasuk says, "Imechahi." What does that mean, imechahi? Mishum imo tamechayvo. V'yeh tamechayvo mishum eshet av. That means you're only going to be mechayev oto because of his mother, and not because of eshet av. Right? That means even though he's also eshet av, she's also eshet av, you only give him the mother. So one more time, according to this braita is not like the way that we learned to the Mishnah. And really, if somebody goes with his mother, so technically the mother is also eshet av, and also em. You only give him the yisur of the em. So he says, Ela me'ata, so they're going to ask a question, right? He says, Mishume shetavata mechayevo v'yeta mechayevo mishum imo. He says, 1 second. When it says, you're not allowed to reveal the nakedness of your father's wife. Eshet avicha. Lo tegale. You're not allowed to reveal. Right? Because it's an erva. So it's only because of eshet av and not because of the mother? What's going on? Ela, but rather, imo shehi eshet av kai hacha u'mimaet la. Which means like this. Mitzad echad, the first pasuk, which was talking about the yisur because of the mother, is going to be ma'et mishum eshet av. And mitzad sheni, right, when we're talking about the yisur of eshet aviv, it's going to be ma'et, right, because of the mother. So hashta imo sheno eshet aviv mechayev, eshet aviv sheno imo mechayev, imo shi eshet aviv no mechayev klal. So he says, I don't understand. So then when are you ever going to be chayav on the mother? Because one more time, what are you trying to do? You're trying to do the mother, which is not Eshet Aviv, right? And then you're trying to do Eshet Aviv, which is not the mother. So what about the mother? Right? No, because each one is trying to be Mamayat, and that's what we're asking. So he says, the two, right? That we're trying to say the exact opposite. We're trying to be Mamayat. Fine. The two, and furthermore, L'Rabbanan Nami, right? Again, that was the order, the Shakotari, the Gemara. The Gemara is trying to exclude that, and that's what we're trying to ask. So he says, "Vetu," and furthermore, l'Rabbanan nami, and according to Rabbanan, it's written in Mechahi. Meaning, if you're going to tell me that each pasuk was trying la'apuke, beforehand, when we learned the Mishnah, it was two averot. It was Eshet Av plus Imo. So it makes sense. Why? They're two averot. But if you're going to tell me when it says Eshet Av, it was coming to exclude Imo. And when it says Imecha, it was coming to exclude Eshet Av. So what about your mother by herself? What? That's it? She's Patura? Like you're Patur? What's going on? So he says, Ela barather, Haumi Baile, the Pasuk needed for another drasha. Lechdarav Shisha bedravidi. The Rabbi Yehuda Nami, Haumi Baile, Lechdarav Shisha bedravidi, which means he needs it for, right, of Shisha bedravidi. So he comes and he says, because he was Doreshi Mechahi, to do with Onesh, on somebody that comes in on his mother. So the Gemara is going to say, so according to that, let's try to say what's going on now. So he says like this, Ela amar Ravacha bered Ravika. Says Ravacha bered Ravika. Amar Kra, the Pasuk says, Imechahi lo tegale irvata. Now when it says irvata, it's Lashon Yachid. So he says, Mishum irva achat ata mechayvo. V'yeh ata mechayvo mishum shte irvot. So he says, so you're only going to come and be mechayev oto mishum irva achat, which means that a person is going to come and have relations with his mother, which is also a Eshet Aviv, right? But what? But it's not going to be Chayav anymore? So how does that work? So he says, Ela me'ata, so now let's take another pasuk then. What about Irvat Kalatecha? According to your reasoning, we kept on trying to say that even though it's written both, because it says Imechahi, right? But each one was coming la'apuke, because here it meant like Hilu, the stepmother. Right? So here, when you're going to come and you're going to lapuke it to take it out, so let's take the daughter-in-law now. The exact same learning. Let's try to go now downwards instead of upwards. Ela me'ata irvat kalatecha lo tegale. Do not reveal the nakedness of your daughter, of your son, right? Because it's Eshet bincha, it's the wife of your son, right? Lo tegale irvata hacharami. So now 1 second. Mishum irva achat ta mechayvo v'to mechayv mishum shte irvot. So now if a person lives with his daughter-in-law, so there's only one irva, right? It's not going to be two irvot. It's only going to be because it's the daughter-in-law, and it's not because of that. So he says only because of one erva. Batnan, we already learned. Habal kalato chayavela mishum kalato mishum eshet ish. Says you've got two avirot. She's an eshet ish plus the daughter-in-law, so it's two avirot. Doesn't matter whether the son is alive or not alive. Velo palig Rabbi Yehuda. So Rabbi Yehuda doesn't argue on this. Ela kevan dechad gufahu, but rather because it's one goof, right? Afal gav de trei sudaninu. Even though it's going to be two different isurim, ktiv, it's written, Ervata. Ervata means Lashon Yachid, which is going to be individual. Hachanami, so to here, given the Chad Gufahu, since it's going to be one Gufa, it's one body, Afal Gav the Trei Sudaninu, even though there's going to be two different Isunim, it's written in Vata. Meaning, not because it's written in Vata, it means one Erva. It's because it's one body. There could be two different Isurim, but it's one body. So you cannot bring me a proof from the fact that it says Ervata, right? Ervata, that we're talking about only one Avera. It's two Averot, but it's one body. That's why it says Ervata. So Elamar Rava, but according to this, says Rava, Kasava Rabbi Yehuda, says Rabbi Yehuda, Ervata Vicha, Zo Eshet Avicha. When it says Ervata Vicha, it means the wife of your father. Umaiti la b'gzira shava, and it's bringing it from a gzira shava. Umashma ben eshet aviv she'imo, ben eshet aviv she'enimo. So it's mashma both. It could be your mother, right? It's the wife of the, or even if it's not your mother. Imo she'eno eshet aviv minayin. But what about if it's your mother, and right now she's not eshet aviv? Meaning she's already divorced. How do you know that you can't have relations with her? Tabulomar ervati mecha lo tegale. That's where they learn from ervati mecha. So he says, so therefore we're coming and we're saying that you're going to obligate him only because of imo and not because of eshet aviv, even in such a case. Okay? So he comes and he says, and then obviously we're going to learn a Braita according to Rava. So that's how we actually took out from the case of, right, that we're actually learning now from Imecha, because beforehand we were learning Imecha as a continuation, that it was all again the stepmother, because it was a continuation of Eshet Aviv. Now we're saying no. When it says Ervat Aviv, it's on both. Benim ze imo or lo imo, right? If it's not Ervat Aviv and it's only the mother, because basically they got divorced, right? Or he passed away, the father. So now how do you know that that's a sur? That learning now from the Imechahi.